All right, everyone, let's get started. Welcome to Putting It Together, Integrating Best Practices, which is a webinar in our Fixed School Discipline webinar series. First, a few housekeeping items. Everyone is muted, and if you would like to chat with me or you'd like to send a question or a comment, please use your chat function. We will open for questions at the end of the presentations from Placer County Office of Education and San Francisco Unified School District. But if you have questions along the way, please do enter them as they arise. This webinar will be archived. It will be recorded. So I have started recording it and it will be archived in a few days. So if you're unable to stay for the whole thing or if you want to share it with your colleagues, you can do that. Additionally, there is an evaluation at the end of the webinar. If you, after you close out, if you can just fill out a very, very short evaluation so we can continue to offer relevant topics in the webinar series. So the Fixed School Discipline webinar series is a deeper dive into the Fixed School Discipline toolkits, which are available online for download, and you can also email info@fixedschooldiscipline.org for any hard copies. All we ask is that you pay for postage. So today, what we're going to talk about with Mike Lombardo, Jenny Gibson, Jordan Paxhia, and Ben Kaufman, and you can see where they are from on this opening slide, is a deeper dive into implementing multiple school discipline strategies. So many districts are incorporating and streamlining frameworks and services, and we have a few pages in our toolkit that that kind of give short case studies and graphics about what incorporating strategies can look like. But of course, like anything in education, there isn't a one size fits all. So what we're going to talk about today is what Mike Lombardo is doing in Placer County, and then also what Jenny, Jordan, and Ben are doing in San Francisco Unified, and that should be able to give you some tools about what you can do in your own districts and schools. So without further ado, let's hear from, we're going to hear from Jenny Gibson and Jordan Paxhia, who are Safe and Supportive Schools coaches. Jenny was previously a Restorative Practices coach and a fourth grade classroom teacher. And Jordan, who is also a Safe and Supportive Schools coach for San Francisco Unified School District, was previously a PBIS coach with the district. And prior to becoming a coach, Jordan was a special education teacher in Boston and San Francisco, working with students of all needs and ages. And Ben Kaufman is an Office of Pupil Services supervisor with San Francisco Unified School District. And his work supports the district in district-wide implementation of restorative justice and positive behavior intervention and supports through the Behavior Action Triage Teams, which have a really great name, the BAT teams. So go ahead and take it away, guys.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jenny Gibson. I'm very excited to join you all in this webinar. Our first slide, if you can change that, Sarah, is just an overview and our objectives for the webinar. We want to provide folks with an understanding and theoretical rationale and historical perspective of school-wide positive behavior intervention supports and restorative practices implementation within SFUSD. We also want to provide just the practical components and what we've done within the district. Also, just share how PBIS and restorative practices are complementary disciplines, methods for creating that safe and supportive school culture that we're all striving for. So thanks for joining us.
So Sarah, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. My name is Ben Kaufman. Folks, thank you for being online with us today. In terms of our work, really what I wanted to speak to, and Sarah, I'm going to take a moment to go to my background. In terms of my background and my heart of hearts, I'm a school social worker. And my experiences in that work have brought me to our work around restorative practices and restorative justice. I had the opportunity to work for 12 years in a non-public school and also a residential treatment facility here in San Francisco. And then when stepping out of that role, I had the opportunity to be able to work as a school social worker here in Civic Center Secondary School, which is our county school of San Francisco. And the reason why that is noteworthy is that work happened for me in 2009, which was also the board resolution that we passed as a school district to be able to utilize restorative practices as an alternative to suspensions and expulsions. And I'm saying that because that work was already happening on the ground here at Civic Center Secondary School, because there simply was no other place for young people to go from a suspension and expulsion standpoint because they were already with our county school. And so out of necessity, we really focused on connecting with young people, developing those positive relationships that we wanted to with them, and in my role as a school social worker, I was able to move that work forward within Civic Center and then through pupil services in a variety of roles. And what's important about that work is the fact that it was supported by our board, and it was also supported by our district-wide leadership at the superintendent level. And because of the fact that we had that level of support, we've been able to be extremely effective in looking at our alternatives to suspensions and expulsions, and then taking it a step further in 2014 with being able to be inclusive of PBIS and restorative practices in our efforts to be able to have the safe and supportive schools that we wanted. And so that work has continued, and we'll speak in more detail about that very, very soon. So Sarah, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great.
Can you hear us, Sarah? Oh, great, thank you. Here we're looking at specifically suspension data from 2012-2013. And in 2009, in the previous slide, the board had passed a resolution to bring restorative practices to our district. And at that time in 2009, we had a 0.5 position filled to really bring that effort through the whole district. In 2012, we realized that we were still significantly disproportionate, and between 2009 and 2012, we were able to expand within our central office to hire on 5 additional full-time restorative practices coaches, as well as through the SACE fund, which Ben was talking about earlier in the previous slide, we were able to hire 3 high school coaches to support our 3 identified high schools in an effort to really bring alternatives to suspensions and to really support on the ground for RP, for restorative practices. We were able also at that time to provide more centralized trainings through our 5 central coaches, as well as support at the sites both building relationships, building community, and helping to restore harm or repair harm. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Next slide. Thank you.
So at the same time that we were kind of beefing up our restorative practices trainings and supports, we started our first year of behavior RTI training at site. And so at this point, we brought in Dr. Clayton Cook and Diana Browning-Wright. And our first year for our schools, we provided 8 days of training, 2 days each over the course of the year at 4 different times. And what we focused on that first year was a trainer of trainers model. So we had site teams come to us, and it was about 150 people at each time. And we worked on a lot of theoretical information, people understanding the why behind behavioral RTI, because it was a shift in the way that we were doing things at sites. So we were working on the theoretical part, and we were also at the same time trying to give people practical strategies, evidence-based strategies that they could take back and use right away, so they could start to see the positive effects of having a multi-tiered system of support. That first year, again, we focused really on just mostly Tier 1 and a little bit of Tier 2, because we wanted to emphasize that you can't move up in providing services to kids until you have a really solid foundation of universal supports. So each year from 2012-2013 school year, we brought in a new cohort of schools. So each cohort went through 8 days of training the first year, 6 days of training the second, and then it was reduced after that from there. But at the same time, we increased our coaching support. Next slide, please. Oh, did you?
That's fine.
Great. All right, shifting back to restorative practices, this slide illustrates just the definition of what restorative practices is, but what's important here is from an implementation perspective, the coach is really focused on proactive, building, sustaining relationships in the community, really emphasizing that every member feels like they're a part of the community and that they belong in the community. Once we've really established that, and that's a shift too for many of our sites that you know, when there's harm, we want to just quickly respond. So really emphasizing that, yes, we respond, but at the same time, how do we continue to build the relationships within our community and be able to provide those processes so that when harm has occurred, that our students, our young people, even the adults within our school community has a desire to restore that relationship.
I want to take a few moments and also speak to the work that we do within the Office of Pupil Services, that part of what we've done is oftentimes our office was perceived to be more of a disciplinary body within our school district. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to shift our focus to be much more proactive in terms of establishing those safe and supportive communities that we want at the sites in our work with our coaches. And we wanted to do that because we've recognized how important it is to be able to have that environment, to be able to reduce the possibility of kids being removed from that learning environment. And we've been able to do that both in being proactive, but then that shift has also been when events have occurred. Again, I just want to echo how important it's been to be able to be appropriately responsive in a non-punitive manner to be able to reinforce the repairing harm that's occurred at our sites for our young people, for their families, and for the adults. And the overall culture. Thank you, Sarah, for the next slide.
So just a quick overview. I'm sure you've all seen many different types of triangles. So we're just talking a little bit here about what school-wide PBIS means. And so we really are trying to emphasize in San Francisco Unified to sites that we're looking at a multi-tiered system of support that promotes more efficient and equitable learning environments through the use of evidence-based practices. And so because it's a framework and it's not a curriculum, you're easily able to integrate the concepts of restorative practices into those different tiers, from the very universal level of establishing relationships to the more intensive tiers such as conferencing and those qualities, and restorative circles to repair harm that's been done. And we're going to talk a little bit more. We have another triangle for you in a little bit that really emphasizes how the two are integrated. And there it is. Next slide.
There it is. It's amazing. So what's great about this slide is it is a concrete, tangible example of what we mean when we're talking about being inclusive of both evidence-based supports and also the work that we're doing around restorative practices. And it really illustrates, how schools can really make it accessible and tangible for them. And the thing that I'd like to highlight here when looking at the slide is we were really looking, often as people talk about having the work be integrated and having it be seamless, and we're striving for that to occur. But another part that our coaches, the role that our coaches have really taken on is helping schools understand how we calibrate it, how it works together when we're talking about, for example, greeting students at the door and utilizing a social emotional curriculum like the Paxhia behavior game in Second Step, and being proactive in the tools that we're using around classroom management. We're working with our schools to be able to hold those pieces while at the same time working with our adults and our students to be able to use affective language, understand the concept of fair process, utilizing the social discipline window when making decisions, looking at being, using those proactive community building circles. So it's been wonderful because this slide is a very concrete, tangible example of what that looks like, and it's when partnering with our schools, it's in a lot of ways, it's the roadmap for the professional development and trainings that we use with our schools. Jordan and Jane, did you have anything you wanted to add? No. Okay. Next slide, please.
So just to further reinforce what we're doing,
I'm so sorry to interrupt if I am interrupting. I actually can't hear, but I think that all of you can hear me. So Jenny, whenever you want me to advance this next slide, could you go ahead and just send me a quick chat that says next? You can just enter next. And I'm really sorry, but for some reason, okay.
secretaries. So it's really important that we're messaging it out in that way.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to add here that what we're looking at is a paradigm shift, and understanding that we're shifting cultures, we're shifting social learning cultures within our school environments. And a personal story that I have that really is very personal to me is my experience growing up was in a very traditional household. My parents were highly, very strict, and it created this environment of, unpredictability, and we were always on edge, and I felt policed. And sometimes I feel like that's, been our traditional environments for school settings. And so it's really just shifting that practice, because when kids feel like they're being policed, then they feel like they have to hide something. And we're really working towards creating an environment that is safe, that's consistent, that kids know what is expected of them, and that ultimately is kind of the goal of both PBIS and restorative practices.
What we're finding when we create these environments is that kids who come from highly impacted communities where they are witness to domestic violence, violence in the community, uncertainty about when they might get their next meal, or homeless kids, they know, though, if they come to these schools where we have a strong system of PBIS and restorative practices, they're able to feel safe and be more successful at that environment. And what we're finding is where schools are implementing this with the most fidelity, we're also seeing an improvement in attendance, because kids want to be there. It is a place for them to feel safe and to feel successful.
I think the piece I would also add is our ability to be able to include both PBIS and restorative practices in our efforts also reflects the young people and what our young people are responding to. Many of our young people, when they're coming to school, that level of safety that they experience when we're being consistent, when we're being predictable, when we have that safe learning environment where the expectations are clearly understood, that oftentimes will stabilize the young people that we're working with. And for young people, for some other young people, they respond when they know that the adult in front of them truly cares about them, that the adult in front of them knows that they look forward to seeing them, that there's a smile on their face, that they're greeted at the door when they enter the classroom, that they take the time to connect with them both when they're doing well but also when they're in conflict. And I think the balance between the two really is strengthened, and really it complements the learning environments that we want in our schools, that really is bringing our young people to school, and not only bringing them to school, but having them feel like they're successful. All right.
All right.
All right. There it is. Okay. So what we have done when you're looking at this slide right here, this is the Systems of Positive Behavioral Support. With this slide, this is reflected in the way that we are organizing ourselves both as a school site team, and also the way that we're organizing ourselves internally within pupil services. One of the things that you'll see very, very soon is you'll see a slide that is our org chart of our department. And what's extremely important about that visual that you see is, in the past, we were organized by discipline. So we had our groups sitting by attendance, by PBIS, by behavioral analysts, by restorative practices. They were sitting by their area of focus. And what we've done is we've organized ourselves now to be in grade level teams. And what we've done in our efforts to be able to do that is promoted a level of collaboration that we want to have amongst one another. We've also been able to use things like fair process to be able to build consensus. The other piece that we've done too is we've created consistent times that we're able to meet and work together as a group around supporting the work that we're doing around schools. And then the other piece is looking at our level of implementation. We've wanted to be logical and realistic in terms of identifying solutions, both the immediate solutions but the long term. And then in terms of looking at the teaching and facilitating of success, that has been the way that we have developed professional development with one another, and the ways in which we're modeling that for one another, giving ourselves feedback to be able to basically support our best practices or most successful practices at the site. And then in terms of looking at the measuring and evaluating of our behavior support, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but that's through our tiered fidelity inventory. And then another important data collection tool that we have developed is our BASIS tool, and that BASIS tool, has done 3 things specifically. It's looking at our data around attendance, specifically chronic truancy, looking at the interventions that we're utilizing at our sites, and then also looking at our office discipline referrals. And some of the things I want to highlight around that is that data is real-time data that is accessible by our site staff. Our principals and other support staff can see that, and it is able to help guide the work that they're doing from a data decision-making standpoint, and is able to help guide the scope and sequencing of the support that they want and the level of training. So those are some things I want to speak to. In terms of sustaining and data decision making, I will say that again goes to tiered fidelity inventory, and also when sites are able to review their data. So I mapped out what it looks like internally for ourselves. The other part I would like to speak to is there's a parallel process that happens at the site level where we have our climate teams, and they go through this level of collaboration, all these key bullet points. They go through this process with our safe and supportive school coaches. In terms of looking at systems of positive behavior support, I'll take a few moments to speak to some of the barriers that we've experienced around that, but I'm going to pass the baton briefly to Jordan and Jenny to see if there's anything that they wanted to add.
I was just going to speak to the barriers as well. Ideally, with BASIS, it's a wonderful tool, and all sites have access to it, but unfortunately, some sites don't have computers or laptops in every single classroom at this point. It is something that is in the works, but it
process to get teachers to shift their practice of using handwritten office referral forms. And then also, prior to the last couple of years, most elementary schools didn't have office referral forms, so we weren't even able to capture that data up until most recently. I would say most elementary schools are moving toward at least some kind of paper collection form, and then there's a very select few schools who are actually using the BASIS office referral form online, so that we as coaches can see that information immediately.
I think the last piece I would add around that is that given where we're at in our development and our implementation of BASIS, we are at the beginning stages. So in terms of looking at the barriers that we're experiencing from an access standpoint, from a user interface standpoint, we are growing in those areas, but I will say the data itself that we're receiving now has been extremely powerful because of our ability, for example, to look at the number of instructional minutes lost, and we've been able to break that down from a disciplinary standpoint to a truancy standpoint, and we've been able to also look at that from a gender standpoint, from an ethnicity standpoint. That data in itself has been able to really inform our work now and also moving forward. All right, Sarah, can you go to the next slide? This, what you're looking at, the implementation infrastructure, this has been extremely important within San Francisco Unified. I will tell you that one of the things that we have been very, very fortunate in having is the support of our superintendents, of our district leadership, and also of our school board. Our ability to be able to have their endorsement and support district-wide in their messaging, in our board resolutions, and our ability around funding has really been able to lift our work here centrally and at the sites. Because we've had that level of support, when we first started Restorative Practices in 2009, we were able to essentially have a media campaign. We were able to do trainings, full-day trainings with our staff. We were able to have posters and literature and materials available to all of our district-wide staff, and we're able to really plant seeds across the district. As we moved forward, we were able to refine our work, and the way that we were able to refine our work was by being able to develop a leadership team centrally here within Pupil Services that could then actively fulfill the needs that we had at the sites from a training, coaching, and evaluation standpoint. And as we've moved forward, we've been able to really kind of move the work forward in a deeper level that's sustainable, where our local school teams, our school site teams have been able to take a greater level of ownership around owning restorative practices and PBIS by being able to develop their trainings to be able to both lead the trainings but also to be supported by our coaches and leading professional development at the site. So those things are happening. It's been a work in progress, but the overview that you're looking at right now has been the structure that we've had within our district.
So looking at trainings, what we've been able to provide for our sites is centralized trainings for restorative practices as well as behavior RTI and PBIS. For restorative practices, we've done from 2010 through 2014, last year, we were able to provide centralized 2 full-day trainings for all of any SFUSD staff. That includes classified staff as well as certificated and our administrators. I'll also speak to just on-site trainings that our coaches were able to offer. They were able to provide using Prop A hours to sites that they were supporting RP implementation efforts. I'll speak to PBIS and RTI implementation.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, all of our elementary schools and all of our middle schools have had training in RTI, PBIS, and some of our high schools have had trainings starting at the beginning of June this past, or started last fall. We had our high schools trained. And it was using the model that you saw earlier in the timeline where they had trainers professional development over the course of the year that they then brought to their sites. And most recently we've had Dr. Robert Horner come on to help with training the rest of the high schools and then elementary schools that may not have had as many years with Clay and Diana as others.
I think what I'd like to add is in terms of how we've evolved as a district is we're striving to find that balance between having centralized trainings while at the same time providing trainings to the site itself. And did I repeat myself, folks? Did I say central and site? Because that's what I meant to say. So webinar folks, what I really am trying to highlight here is that it's having the centralized trainings and also having the site trainings. And the reason why I'm saying that is because as a barrier that we've experienced is, we have had strains district-wide around being able to have subs, for example. And that is an important real kind of limitation that we had, but it's something that I wanted to highlight because what we've done is we have been sensitive to that need from a sub standpoint, and we've really wanted to emphasize keeping our teachers that the kids know in the classrooms. And so what we really tried to do is tailor our training so that our trainings happen after school or at times they happen on the weekends, and we've tried to really limit the number of days as we're moving forward that our adults are off-site. So that's something that we're really striving to do. Another key part of that too is we really wanted to reinforce the sustainability and the stick factor of an adult going to a training or some level of professional development and how that's brought back to the site. One of the things that we are striving to do is to have those trainings take place at the site within a team setting, so there's a greater level of ownership and buy-in by the adults at the site to be able to move our work forward from a whole school implementation standpoint around PBIS and RP. Sarah, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. Oh, okay. coaching, training, past and present. Other way. She went there. We go. What you're looking at here is you're looking at our department itself. It's color-coded by discipline, but the columns that you're looking at are our grade level teams. We have 2 teams at the elementary level to support our cohorts 1 and 4, and then we have 2 teams. We have 2 teams at the other level to support cohort 1 and 3, and then we have our middle school and high school teams. And the thing that I would really want to highlight, and those coaches hold our work around both PBIS and restorative practices. And then we also have our behavioral analysts, and we have our CWALs. Our CWALs are our child welfare attendance liaisons that are supporting our efforts around truancy, around attendance. And these multidisciplinary teams are working together to be able to look at all of the needs that our sites present, because we recognize that the complexity of need isn't going to be resolved with just one discipline, but it's going to be resolved working together as a team. And what's been great about this is we've been able to, from a resource management standpoint, we've been able to organize ourselves in a way where we're able to draw upon one another and our various levels of expertise to be able to support our schools.
I also want to highlight that our elementary teams are the largest teams, in part because we support 72 elementary schools. So there are, let's see, 7 coaches. SSR stands for Safe and Supportive Schools coaches, and the 7 coaches provide on-site support, on-site training, implementation from a systems point of view, working with on-site teams to implement both restorative practices and PBIS, as well as we can provide training on Second Step, on PACS, Good Behavior Game, on
trauma-informed
practices, as well as de-escalation strategies.
Now this is clear, concise. I will say one thing that I would add is the relationships that our coaches form and our team forms with our sites. That is that overlying piece that really has been powerful in terms of a principal, a school social worker, a counselor, a teacher being able to reach out to our teams to be able to get the specific support that they need, both proactively and then also in response to events. But this is what you're looking at is what we oftentimes draw from.
So how do we measure this? How do we figure out what trainings are going to be best? Well, we use the school-wide PBIS tiered fidelity inventory along with another data source, the climate survey that is used for restorative practices. The TFI is a norms tool that was developed by Dr. Robert Horner and his his team.
Yeah.
And so we use this in a couple different ways. First, we use it as a formative assessment, so we're trying to figure out the baseline of where schools are at with their implementation. We also use it as a progress monitoring tool. So based on the outcomes of the TFI, initially we're able to develop a couple different goals that we do for short term, the first like every 3 months, and then we go back and do the TFI again to check on the progress of the sites in their implementation in those areas. And so looking at where their strengths and weaknesses are, we're able to draw from the menu of training options that you saw on the previous slide to help schools move forward in their work. So something that we also want to speak to is that schools, I know, have been feeling a bit of a loss not being able to come back to the full-day trainings that we had in years past. And so this is a way to kind of remedy that situation, because there is that accountability still taking place, and they are getting training, but it's just more individualized to their site.
One thing I would also add is if you ever want to see a room full of really excited school site staff, give them their data. We recently had a training with Rob Horner, and we reviewed, the sites were able to review their tiered fidelity inventory data, and the level of excitement in the room that they had in terms of looking at concretely, this is their data, and their ability to be able to take that data and develop a roadmap to the work moving forward and the work that they've done. It was an exciting time for them, and what we're striving to do is have that data around the tiered fidelity inventory that's holding our work around PBS, having that also be inclusive of our work around restorative practices.
I also just want to add that it's an ongoing process for us to bring in new folks that haven't been trained, to really work with the teams to get them up to speed on what TFI is, what all of the menu of options that the coaches can provide. So that is an ongoing, struggle or challenge in a way, is to meet people where they're at, meet the sites where they're at, depending on how much training and how much efforts they've already put forth.
One last thing I'd like to say before we wrap it up is I'd like to say that Jordan and Jenny are examples of the outstanding work that we're doing here within SFUSD around our work around restorative practices and PBS. And the thing that I'd like to add is their ability to be able to develop those strong relationships, specifically with our site principals and key site staff, has been amazing, because their ability to be able to do that skillfully has really moved the work forward. And when we think about key players within the work of whole school implementation, district-wide implementation, it's been that team's work, their work, in collaboration with our district-wide leadership, but specifically with our site principals, that has really allowed us to be able to move the work forward. With that being said, I would say that we're done with our time, but I will say that the work that we've done is really exciting. We definitely are a work in progress. We're constantly refining our work within SFUSD, but I wanted to thank you, Sarah, for giving us the opportunity to be able to speak to that today.
All right. Thank you so much for that, and also for bearing with me while I'm having a couple of technical difficulties over here. So I'm kind of like flying without ears at some points. So thank you so much for all of the great stuff you shared and for your patience. It's like we're doing a tiered system over here of support. Without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Mike Lombardo, who's the Director of Interagency Facilitation, Student Wellness for the Student Wellness Programs, and the California PBIS Coordinator. He's with the Placer County Office of Education. In this position, he works throughout California in leadership in early prevention, student wellness, social emotional support for students, breaking down barriers to education, collaborative strategy development, and family youth development. He's a member of the State Student Attendance Review Board and California Mental Health Advocates for Children and Youth. He has extensive experience in the implementation and scaling up of evidence-based practices, and currently coordinates the California PBIS Coalition, so the CPC. His diverse professional background includes managing deputy probation officer, assistant director of a juvenile detention facility, assistant director of Placer County Children's Systems of Care, and is currently a director at Placer County Office of Education Educational Services Division. A large part of that current role is to coordinate and collaborate with agency and local partners in the integration of multi-tiered systems of support, so MTSS, we'll be saying that a lot, and for social emotional wellness. He is currently guiding the development of PBIS in more than 250 schools, alternative ed settings, and 2 juvenile institutions. So with all of that, turning it over to you, Mike.
Thanks so much, Sarah. You can practice this. You can flip the slide. So I wanted to start off by giving some context for multi-tiered systems of support. The team from San Francisco Unified gave a spectacular example of what multi-tiered systems looks like in action and the scaffolding of response to restorative practices and PBIS. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But I wanted to emphasize for folks that PBIS is really, or MTSS is a system to create a coherent continuum of evidence-based school-wide practices. I have people tell me all the time, you know, Mike, we do PBIS, or we do restorative practices, or we do social emotional learning, or the leading, or me, or teaching pro-social skills. Well, MTSS is your strategy for scaffolding those practices to your framework at your school site. And we know that children come to us with all kinds of complex needs. There's high expectations in schools, instructional strategies. There's a lot going on academically and social emotionally for kids. So MTSS is a way of having those gears work together. It's not about adding another initiative. It's about prevention. So moving from a model of what was the problem to what help does a student need. Creating a more preventative model that's focused on redesigning the system, but not designing redesigning the student. So we start out with universal prevention for all students, and Jenny and Ben and team talked a little bit about this. This slide gives you an example of what universal prevention might look like across domains on a campus. To 15% of the students need targeted interventions, which are rapid in response, but focused real precisely on what student need is, and using data to define what that need is and support the student. And then intensive interventions really focused on high frequency, high dosage of the intervention, and we'll get into interventions later that look like that support intensive interventions. But really what in intensive interventions, 1 to 5% of the students, so having few students. In a strongly designed system, you'll have the ability to kind of organize it this way, and when you look at your data, you'll see it spill out this way. In some systems, I see there might be, you know, 10, 20% or more of students in intensive interventions, but with a strong framework, the model ends up looking like this. So here's an example of if we were to look at an academic response to intervention through RTI and a behavioral response to intervention. That they're both frameworks for scaffold and multi-tiered systems of support. So we're not just thinking in one domain, that we're collaborating across a district or across a campus to look at student needs wherever that student might fall. A student might need high academic interventions in language arts, but maybe tier 2 interventions, a targeted group for social emotional. So this is really just getting the point across that our students will fall throughout multiple domains. And we want to start with a framework in mind, and Ben and his team talked a lot about PBIS. Whether we're doing academic interventions or behavioral, we really want to start with how do we norm the environment, or how do we get people on the same page so that we can create a strong foundation or framework, and PBIS helps us do that. You could flip this, there we go. So PBIS is a framework for enhancing the adoption or the continuum of evidence-based practices at your school site. PBIS sometimes gets referred to as a program or an intervention of itself, but really PBIS is about establishing a framework for your multi-tiered systems of support. In the PBIS framework, you heard Ben talk about universal interventions for all students. So we ground the environment in common rules, common expectations that both staff and students know, an acknowledgement system that's teaching behavioral skills and focused on student strength. Creating a behavioral matrix to support teachers for looking at what's handled in the classroom and what's sent to the office, and a common referral system. So really the universal part of the PBIS framework is about creating an environment that we're able to have and know everybody's on the same page. So when we look at our data, we can make more effective decisions about students. So it helps us determine the need for the students. And if you were to advance out through the PBIS framework and toll past universal supports, you can see check-in, check-out, and individual practical behavior plans, or prevent, teach, reinforce maybe might be something you're doing at a tier 3 level, or wrap around. So you can see the increase in intensity through the continuum of PBIS. But PBIS isn't the only intervention you want to use, or restorative practices, that there might be a need for a multitude of interventions. So here's an example of what a school might scaffold to, and I like San Francisco Unified's example they gave was an excellent one of how they scaffold their services to meeting student needs at each tier of the pyramid. But at a school site, you might be offering interventions around suicide prevention as well as pro-social interventions. You might be doing something around check-in, check-out for PBIS, or an individual practical behavior plan at Tier 3 or Incredible Years. I think it's really important that each school site map their own interventions, and these are just some that I see happening at school sites. But at your particular school site or your district, what interventions are you doing that are Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3? How are you scaffolding those two? Or what are you scaffolding those to? Do you use a framework like PBIS to scaffold those interventions to it? But it's more than just what we do at the school district. It's also what we do in the community. And the next slide will show that. So community supports and services. I like to say we in education need to get across the sidewalk. What community supports are across your sidewalk at your school? And creating a framework or utilizing those supports to attach to your framework. In a community at a school site across the sidewalk, you might have supports for the Latino community in Placer, something called the Latino Leadership Council. In Tier 2, you might have mentor programs that happen in the community, or teaching pro-social skills, or a Native program, a really effective Native program called White Bison. And then at Tier 3, you might have wraparound supports in the community, or again, Incredible Years or maternal depression, that at each school site is able to access and know what those resources are that surround their school site. So when you're building your pyramid of interventions for students or your multi-tiered systems of supports, don't just look internally at the school, but look at what the community has to offer, because schools can't meet every need of every student. We need to partner and create communities of practice around each of our students' needs. So here's an example. If you, at a school site, we're going to use multi-tiered systems of support for suicide prevention. You might go about a universal set of interventions where we teach all teachers to recognize signs and symptoms of mental distress through a program like Eliminating Barriers to Learning. So all teachers might get that, those strategies and obtain that knowledge for suicide prevention. If you're a high school, you might use something called NAMI on campus, where we're affecting the entire high school population, or maybe Cognito, which is a web-based opportunity for staff to learn how to recognize signs and symptoms. But you can get the idea that we're doing this for everybody at the school site. Then you might set up on your suicide prevention framework targeted interventions, things like mental health first aid or signs of suicide, where we teach a fewer number of staff to be and have skills to meet those kind of tier 2 needs of students. And then when we look at tier 3 for suicide prevention, you might see something like ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, or an excellent program called Coping and Support Training. That is a semester-long curriculum for students that focuses on attaching those students to the school environment, building more connections at school. The program has demonstrated results in decrease in depression and decrease in suicidality. So you can see when we talk about multi-tiered systems of supports, we're not really just thinking academic or behavioral, but what are the supports we do across a continuum? You could do this with your college and career readiness as well. So what does that look like for restorative practices? Sarah wanted me to add a little bit about restorative practices across the continuum. And we know that by a little bit of research on the internet, you will find many examples of tiered systems for students. And we'll get selection tool and the district initiative inventory so we can monitor and track what a school site or what a district is using as their multi-tiered systems. And we'll see those in just a moment. So we like to use this. It's a simple pyramid, and we'll ask schools in our PBIS training, what services are you doing at your school site for student wellness in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3? And have them brainstorm and just write down what are we doing right now in each of those tiers. So basically take an inventory, if you will, of the services that we're doing at a school. And then we want to look at why are we doing those practices. So we like to use this, and if you know, I'm not going to flip back to the other pyramid, but you can see the pyramid is designed under this define, analyze, implement, and evaluate. So we get schools this model to define what is a problem or what is the need in Tier 1. And most importantly, how do we know that's a need? What's the data source or evidence that tells us that's a Tier 1 program that we need? Where are we getting that information from? So you may have a high incidence of behavioral or inconsistent referrals to the office as measured by the number of referrals we're getting across school sites, so that might be a data source you use. We want to analyze or create a hypothesis for why that's occurring, and then implement a solution for that. What are we going to do about it? Now in this model, is it going to be a community-based solution, a family-based, or a school-based solution? And not all things, you know, maybe that we put in our multi-tier systems of support will be school-based. What do we have in the community that can ameliorate or solve this problem? And then I put gap up there. Not the gap in learning necessarily, sometimes people get confused, but we may have a gap. So if we don't have a Tier 1 suicide prevention program, there's a need or a gap, and we need to go and meet with our community providers, our mental health, or look across systems and find some strategy we can do for Tier 1 suicide prevention or for academic interventions or, again, college and career readiness. We also want to evaluate and always evaluate. So here's an example of Tier 2. You would do the same thing. You can't really see the words here, but if you email me after the webinar, I'll send these to you so you can read them. So doing that for Tier 1, Tier 2, and then Tier 3. So there would be an example of what Tier 3 might look like. So we might see in here, if you can't read it, it says define what the problem is, a decreased attendance among a small group of Latino students. Why is that occurring? And then come up with a hypothesis or a Tier 3 intervention, and then how are we going to evaluate that? So selecting a practice. It's really important for us, I think, in education, not to follow the what somebody has, or sometimes we end up bringing practices to school because there's a purveyor or a person who says, you know, school site, I have a free intervention, or I have this grant to do X intervention. And schools sometimes grab onto those because of their because of a lack of resources or an idea that they need that intervention, but just because it's being offered might not be the right fit for your school. So we really like to use this tool called the Hexagon tool, and you can find it at the AI Hub through the University of North Carolina. But we want to really look at using a tool like this to measure the interventions we're currently doing, but also to select interventions. So if we were looking for a Tier 2 intervention to build social emotional responsiveness or behavioral skills for students, we might look at Check and Connect or Teach and Pro-Social Skills. is that really a good fit for our school? So this is an 8-step way of determining the need. Does that intervention fit not only with our school environment, but with the other interventions that we're doing on this campus? Do we have the resources and staffing to be able to carry this out past the training or past the time the grant runs out? All of us have experience getting grants. We launch the initiative, the grant runs out, and it goes away. This tool will give you an opportunity to plan and set up systems to manage long past the limited dollars or the grant funding goes away. Is there that we have going on? Our level of success, so that's our outcome monitoring, and then how do we know that we have high outcomes? What evidence do we see? And I suggest schools do this at least once a year, or once in the beginning, and then put it on a cycle to measure once a year. Here's just a little bit of additional resources. We have pretty limited time, so I can't go into everything that I would have liked to. But if you go to these websites, you'll be able to find the tools and strategies that I talked about, the Active Implementation Hub or the AI Hub. Also, the SMHI Clearinghouse was built by Placer, Sac County Office of Ed, and San Joaquin County for schools throughout California, so that you can go there and find interventions for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, as well as other resources. And then the last one I'll talk about on this page and suggest to schools is the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices, NREPP at SAMHSA. And that's the website that I suggested has a really good overview of what the interventions are, what's the target population, but also is that what tier is that intervention, what level of intervention is, and what's the evidence that that intervention works. I think that's my last slide.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Mike. And so just so everyone knows, this presentation, the PowerPoint, will be available afterwards as well as the full recording of the webinar. So you'll be able to access, the hyperlinks that, for instance, the ones that are on this page, and the ones that Mike just provided us. And then also you can email any of us or call Ben if you have any additional questions. And we had a few questions come in, so now we're going to open for questions, and we had a few come in already. And again, I just wanted to thank everyone for bearing with us for a couple of the little technical glitches that we've been having. And I also really want to thank Angela Nelson for helping me out and being my ear. So one of the questions that we're getting is so I'm reading the question from this person. In my community, we are trying to integrate healing practices since we know that trauma-informed practices are essential to student needs. We see a necessity to do the healing and cultural integration. How familiar is this practice with PBIS? And I guess I'll open to either Mike or Ben, Jenny, and Jordan to answer that question.
I can start off by saying that PBIS is a strong framework to help support trauma-informed care or a trauma-informed school site. That PBIS tends to create a safe environment for students that's predictable, and we know students who have had experienced trauma in their life thrive more under very predictable environments. PBIS also helps faculty at a school site understand that students come from a variety of backgrounds, and as an educator we need to focus on the student's full strength. And then I think PBIS establishes that framework that we could scaffold, if you will, trauma-informed practices or trauma-informed interventions to. We want to have a trauma-informed site, but we also have very specific practices to support those students. I'll turn it over to San Francisco.
I think part of what we would add to that is that we have a training of trainer model that we've utilized within SFUSD. Specifically, we partnered with the UCSF Hearts program to be able to train our school social workers and our wellness center staff around how to respond and support young people and families through a trauma-informed lens. We've also developed professional development and trainings that we bring to our sites to work with our educators so they are more sensitive to engaging with students that may have been exposed to trauma in their communities. And also I would add that restorative practices in terms of giving voice and having dialogue, using the restorative questions in itself, it has been a wonderful kind of sentence framing tool that we've used to be able to have the type of healing dialogue in a more intimate way with our young people, parents, and actually amongst adults. Our teachers in our schools are oftentimes experiencing levels of vicarious trauma in the work that they're doing with their students, and we've been utilizing PBIS in terms of that framework around stability, but also we've been utilizing the different tools and processes for restorative practices to be able to do that, while at the same time training and educating our site staff through our training of trainer model with UCSF Hearts.
Great, thank you. And then there was another question about the cost for integrated approaches, such as what we're talking about today. And the person also asked if you all were using private and district funding.
I can, I guess, start on that one. The cost can vary pretty widely, depending on the type of intervention that you scaffold or take on at a school site. Training can really vary. And again, on the SAMHSA site, if it's not written down it's usually written down at the very bottom what the cost of that intervention is to implement it as it was intended. I know that PBIS, through the California PBIS Coalition, we have kind of a funding structure that is basically cost recovery for school districts, so that the county offices or the SELPAs that are providing the training operate off of a cost recovery model because we're not a private for-profit type of business. And then it might be a little bit different for San Francisco Unified.
Yeah, so for San Francisco, what we've done is we've utilized our funding, our SACE funding, to interrupt disproportionality, and we've been able to use that funding and then also funding through what's called PEEP. And PEEP is our Public Education Enrichment Fund, and that funding has primarily gone to our teachers on special assignment, which is who our coaches are. And so that human capital, we put our funding to be
In some of the districts we're working with, Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63, is funding that's used by a mental health department to help support the development and integration of PBIS or other community supports. So funding can come from a lot of different places, but I think it's important for school sites to look at how can we braid the funding to meet each level or each need at our school or at our district.
Yeah, and a kind of follow-up question that is incorporated in this one is also, are these strategies incorporated into the LCFF funding? So that was definitely a question from one of our participants.
I see across the state, the answer would be definitely yes. That LCFF focuses on student engagement, parent involvement, school climate. Most of the districts we work with use LCFF or LCAP as part of their funding. Also, I see that the majority of districts, if not all of them that we work with, are using PBIS and or restorative practices as part of their plan, as part of developing their LCAP plan.
Okay, great. Did you have anything to add to that, SFUSD team?
So I just wanted to add that PEEF is funded through voters of San Francisco, and last year Proposition C was passed to fund PEEF for another 25 years.
Okay, great. And then before asking the last question, I just wanted to let everyone, just to clarify that when the slideshow is available, there will be an email to all people who registered for this webinar and attended that the slideshow and the webinar will be archived on our webinar page. So when you go to view the webinar there, you can also access the link underneath that's for the slideshow. And also, please do remember, as you know, you're leaving, to fill out our evaluation tool. And the final question that I have is, what are the greatest challenges and barriers at schools who are implementing these strategies, and what are some of the solutions? And I'm sure that could be a really long question and a whole webinar in and of itself, but if maybe you could each identify kind of the greatest challenge and the solution to that that challenge at your different sites.
I can speak a little bit to that. One of the greatest challenges that we experience with implementation at a site level is with the administrators. If we don't have buy-in from the administrator, we find that our work is often sluggish, if at all, anything. Even if we have teachers who are moving the work forward, the administrator is essential to continuing that message to other staff at the school site. So that's our biggest, to me, that's one of the largest barriers to implementation.
And Sarah, if you don't mind, I think each one of us, I think, would like to just take a moment to respond to that, because we all got kind of fired up when we heard about barriers. So I think we all, in our respective roles, we want to take a few moments to respond. That's okay.
So I think for me, one of the greatest barriers is the amount of sites that we support as coaches. As much as I spend time at one site, sometimes because of the admin buy-in that Jordan spoke to about, allows me to be on site and support them further. And so that sometimes I inadvertently am not able to support as many of the sites at that level, both because of buy-in and because of just capacity alone. We have 72, again, we have 72 schools and 7 coaches, so we have at least 10 to 12 schools each.
I think, Sarah, when thinking about barriers, I think that, I was very deliberate around having Jordan and Jenny speak and lead this effort in this webinar tonight because of the fact that they are on the ground living the work on a daily basis. And I would say that from a barrier standpoint, there's that balance in terms of we do have tremendous support at multiple levels from a leadership standpoint within our district, but that key piece in terms of the way that a site principal and assistant principal, the way that they set the tone to be able to move the work forward, that can be extremely effective and powerful, and at times that can hinder our work. But what we've been able to do is we've been able to work with our assistant superintendents and also work with the school site team. So there's this pressure that comes up that's bottom up and also top down. And we've also, fortunately, Richard Carranza has made it very, very clear how important our work is to interrupt disproportionality. And the messaging, as the superintendent that he's had, around that, how strong and powerful that's been, has really helped our efforts tremendously. But from a barrier standpoint, again, it's a work in progress with the implementation, and that ultimately it's the tone that is set by our leaders at multiple levels within our district that really determines how effective we are.
For me, I would agree with everything that San Francisco Unified said, that when we work with districts, we really focus at the district level. Getting district administration buy-in is such a key part, as well as the site administration level buy-in. And then making sure that the staff at each school site know the reasons why we're going this direction, whether it's PBIS or restorative practices or some other intervention. And we want to at least have about 80% buy-in from the faculty or staff at a school site. Research tells us if we have over 80%, it's more than likely the intervention will be a lot easier to sustain. I think the other barrier is data, and data collection comes up a lot. A lot of our systems aren't really adept at the rapid response for what we need to look at around data. So depending on the district's data system, we encourage schools to use SWIFT because it's so easy to drill down and find out what the need is. But there's a lot of competing needs around data at school sites, so we try to work with districts around that as well.
All right, great. Thank you so much for those answers. And I think that this webinar and all of the information that you guys shared really is going to be helpful, I think, for a lot of people because it gives them some real tools and real things to think about. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your very busy days and lives to present on this webinar, and then also for everyone who joined. Thank you so much for joining, and I will be in contact soon to send everyone information when we have the webinar and the slideshow up to archive. I definitely will, and I got a couple of messages just now, and I will definitely add websites, a couple of the other websites to this last slide before I upload it so that everyone is able to see some of the work, see what this work looks like for SFUSD. So healthiersf.org/restorative-practices.org. I will send that out to everyone as well. And again, I just want to thank everyone for joining. and presenting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.